I felt the weight of the paperwork in my hands as I walked up the familiar stone path, my heartbeat surprisingly steady despite what I was about to do. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them lounging on my custom-designed sectional, champagne flutes on my imported marble coffee table, her head thrown back in laughter at something my husband had said. They looked so comfortable, so settled in a home they had no right to claim. Little did they know that in my handbag was a document that would wipe those smiles off their faces instantly, the final sale agreement for the property they were currently enjoying. I hadn't just come to confront them, I'd come to evict them from a house that no longer existed in either of our names. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Did you know about this? The text from my brother came at 2:36 a.m., jolting me awake from what had already been a restless sleep. After 6 months of taking space from our marriage, with Andrew suggesting we should explore who we are individually, I'd been trying to adjust to my new reality in the small downtown apartment I'd reluctantly rented. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the harsh brightness in my darkened bedroom. Mason rarely texted, especially not in the middle of the night. When I opened the message, the image that loaded onto my screen hit me like a physical blow. There was Andrew, my husband of 12 years, standing on the wraparound porch of our Silvercrest beach house, his arm wrapped around Vanessa Kent, my former personal trainer. They were both holding champagne glasses, the sunset casting a golden glow over them and the weathered cedar siding of the home I'd painstakingly renovated over the past 3 years. But it was the caption that made me sit bolt upright, fully awake now. New beginnings at our Silvercrest sanctuary. So blessed to call this slice of heaven home. Forever home. Coastal. Living. New chapter. Our Silvercrest sanctuary? Our? I stared at the image, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The beach house wasn't just any property. It wasn't even primarily about its multi-million-dollar value, though that was certainly significant. This was the house I discovered as a dilapidated foreclosure while Andrew was away on one of his many business trips. This was the project I'd poured my soul into while he claimed to be too busy building his consulting firm to waste weekends at the beach. This was my house. Mason's second text came through. Liv, are you seeing this? Can they do that? I thought the beach house was in your name. He was right to question it. The beach house was in my name. Primarily, at least. I had purchased it with money from my grandmother's inheritance, which was explicitly protected in our prenuptial agreement as separate property. Andrew's name appeared on some of the paperwork, but only because I'd added him as a courtesy, never imagining he'd try to claim it as his own. I got out of bed, no longer able to lie still, and walked to the window of my rented apartment. The city was quiet at this hour, just the occasional car passing on the street below. How different from the constant rhythm of waves I'd fallen asleep to for years at Silvercrest. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification from Andrew himself. We need to talk about dividing the properties. Vanessa and I would like the beach house. You can have the city condo. It suits your urban lifestyle better anyway. My urban lifestyle? I almost laughed at the absurdity. I was living in this apartment because he had wanted space. I'd always been happiest at the beach house, walking barefoot on the shore in the early mornings, collecting shells and sea glass that I'd later incorporate into the home's design. Andrew had always complained about the sand, the salt air that corroded his expensive watches, the limited nightlife compared to the city. Now suddenly, Silvercrest suited his lifestyle? I opened my laptop and navigated to my digital files. If Andrew thought I would simply hand over the beach house without a fight? He clearly didn't know me as well as he thought he did after 12 years of marriage. Within minutes, I had located all the documentation related to the Silvercrest property. The original purchase agreement showing the funds came directly from my separate bank account. The renovation records with my name on every contract. The property tax payments made from my personal account. But most importantly, I found the specific clause in our prenuptial agreement that I'd insisted upon, despite Andrew's eye-rolling and comments about my excessive caution being unromantic. The clause clearly stated that any property purchased primarily with funds from my inheritance would remain my separate property regardless of whose names appeared on the deed, and further specified that in the event of separation, neither party could occupy such property with a new partner without the express written permission of the other. I'd have to thank my lawyer Sophia for insisting on that particular detail. As the reality of the situation began to crystallize in my mind, I felt something unexpected happen. The initial shock and hurt began to transform into something else, something harder, colder, more focused. I had spent years being the accommodating wife, the one who compromised, who understood when Andrew needed to work late, who didn't complain, when he missed anniversaries because of unmissable client meetings. I had listened to him dismiss my passion for restoration and design as a cute hobby, rather than the skilled work it actually was. I had watched him take credit at parties for the increasing value of our property portfolio, investments I had, researched and properties I had improved while he networked and schmoozed. But this? Moving his affair partner into my beach house? The one place that was undeniably, indisputably mine? This was a line I would not allow him to cross. I picked up my phone and dialed Mason's number, not caring about the late hour. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the time. "I was waiting for you to call," he said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get my house back," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "And then I'm going to make sure Andrew never takes anything from me again." "Do you want me to come over?" Mason asked, concern evident in his tone. "No," I said after a moment's consideration. "But I do need you to clear your schedule for this weekend. I think it's time we paid a visit to Silver Crest." After ending the call with Mason, I sent a brief text to Sophia. "Emergency. Need to meet the first thing tomorrow. Andrew has moved someone into the Silver Crest house, bringing all documentation." Her response came surprisingly quickly at 3 a.m. "My office, 7:30. Bring coffee. Strong." Sleep was no longer an option. I spent the remainder of the night methodically, organizing every document related to the beach house, creating a timeline of the purchase, renovation, and Andrew's gradual distancing from both me and the property. I pulled up bank statements showing the exact transfers from my inheritance account to cover the down payment and major renovation costs. I even found old text messages from Andrew complaining about the money pit at the beach and asking why I was wasting so much time on that broken-down shack. By the time dawn broke over the city skyline, I had compiled a digital and physical file that told the complete story of Silver Crest. My story, not the fiction Andrew and Vanessa were now trying to write. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing a structured charcoal pantsuit that I'd previously worn to important client meetings in my role as a historical preservation consultant. My work restoring and repurposing historic properties had given me both the vision and the practical knowledge to transform the neglected beach house into the stunning coastal retreat it had become. Today, that same professional precision would serve a different purpose. Sophia's office was located in a converted Victorian in the downtown legal district. By the time I arrived, coffee in hand as requested, she was already at her desk, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed some papers. "Olivia," she said, looking up as I entered, "let me see what we're dealing with." I handed her both the coffee and my meticulously prepared file. As she examined the documents, her expression remained impassive, but I caught the slight narrowing of her eyes that indicated she'd found something significant. "This is good," she finally said. tapping a manicured nail on the prenuptial clause about separate property occupation. Very good, actually. Did Andrew ever seek your written permission to move his friend into the Silvercrest property? Absolutely not, I replied, pulling out my phone to show her Andrew's email about dividing properties that had arrived just hours ago. This is the first communication I've received indicating that they're even living there. Sophia's smile was small, but satisfied. Then he's in clear violation of the prenuptial agreement he signed. This gives us significant leverage. She continued reviewing the documents while I sipped my coffee, the lack of sleep beginning to catch up with me. When she reached the social media post that Mason had sent, she paused, studying the image closely. Are they using your furniture? The pieces you wrote about in Coastal Living last year? I looked more carefully at the photo. She was right. In the background, visible through the glass doors, was the custom driftwood dining table I'd commissioned from a local artisan, paired with the vintage captain's chairs I'd spent months restoring. The hand-woven rugs I'd brought back from a trip to Maine covered the reclaimed heart pine floors I'd personally helped to sand and finish. Yes, I said, feeling a fresh wave of indignation. Everything in that house was either selected or created by me. Sophia removed her glasses, fixing me with a direct look. Olivia, I need to ask you something important. What do you want to happen here? Do you want to fight for the house in the divorce settlement? Or are you looking for something else? I considered her question carefully. The beach house represented years of my life, countless hours of creative energy, and a significant financial investment, but it also now held the taint of betrayal. The knowledge that Andrew and Vanessa had walked its halls, slept in my carefully designed spaces, used the kitchen I'd planned down to the last cabinet pull. Something shifted inside me as I sat in Sophia's office. A new possibility emerged, one that offered not just retribution, but liberation. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I want to sell it, I said, the words surprising me even as I spoke them. I want to sell the house without telling Andrew, and I want to make sure that every penny of the proceeds remains mine. Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Under the terms of your prenup and given the clear documentation of separate property status, that's actually quite doable. The market in Silvercrest is extremely hot right now. Properties like yours are selling within days, often above the asking price. How quickly could we make this happen? I asked, a plan beginning to form in my mind. If we move aggressively, and if you're willing to accept a slightly lower price for an all-cash, rapid-close offer, potentially within 2 weeks. She hesitated. But Olivia, I have to ask, are you sure? This isn't just about legal strategy. This house clearly means something to you. I thought about the countless weekends I'd spent at Silvercrest, the joy I'd felt watching the broken-down fishing cottage transform into a showpiece of coastal design. I remembered the mornings spent watching dolphins from the wraparound porch, the evenings by the refurbished River Rock fireplace, the sense of accomplishment as each room was completed. But I also thought about what the house represented now. Andrew's ultimate dismissal of my work, my passion, my separate identity outside of being his wife. By moving Vanessa into the space I'd created, he'd made his statement clear. What was mine could be claimed, used, and repurposed according to his needs. It was time to make my own statement in return. I'm sure, I said firmly. Let's sell the house. But there's one condition. I want to be the one to tell Andrew and Vanessa after it's done, in person. Sophia studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. I know some very discreet realtors who specialize in private sales to qualified buyers. No public listings, no open houses, no signs on the property. Andrew and his guest would never need to know until the papers are signed. Perfect, I said, feeling a calm determination to replace the hurt and shock of the early morning hours. And in the meantime, I think I'll take a little trip to Silver Crest this weekend, just to assess the current state of my property before offering it to potential buyers. As I left Sophia's office, the morning sun had fully risen over the city. Office workers hurried past on their way to their jobs, coffee cups in hand, most of them unaware that their day had already begun hours ago for me, a day that marked the start of something new. Andrew had always underestimated me. He'd seen my careful attention to detail as overthinking, my insistence on clear financial boundaries as pessimism, my passion for restoration as merely decorative rather than transformative. He'd believed that the woman who had stood in his shadow at corporate events, who had maintained their home while he built his career, who had compromised again and again for the sake of peace, would continue to accommodate his wishes even in betrayal. He was about to discover just how wrong he'd been. I pulled out my phone and texted Mason. Silver Crest, Saturday morning. I'll pick you up at 7. Bring coffee and your camera. We have a house to document. His reply came immediately. I'm in. Should I bring anything else? Baseball bat, lawyer, bail money? Despite everything, I smiled. Just yourself and a poker face. I'm not looking for a confrontation. Yet. This is just reconnaissance. As I walked back to my apartment to prepare for work, I felt lighter somehow. The shock that had jolted me awake at 2:36 a.m. had crystallized into purpose. Andrew and Vanessa thought they were beginning their new chapter in my beach house. They didn't realize they were merely temporary occupants in a home that would soon belong to someone else entirely. And when they found out, I would be there to witness the realization dawn on their faces, the understanding that while they had been playing house on my wraparound porch, I had been 3 steps ahead of them, orchestrating a finale they never saw coming. The drive to Silver Crest on Saturday morning felt like traveling back in time. As Mason navigated the winding coastal highway, I found myself telling him the story of how the beach house had come into my life, a story I realized he had only heard in fragments before. It was during that period when Andrew was in Seattle. For the Thompson Group expansion, I explained, watching the scenery gradually transition from inland suburbs to coastal scrub. He was gone for almost 3 months straight. Remember? Mason nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. That was right. After Grandma Catherine passed away, wasn't it? The transformation from the dilapidated cottage I'd discovered to the elegant coastal home standing before us had been the work of 3 painstaking years. I'd been hands-on for every phase, from shoring up the sagging foundation to selecting the perfect shade of blue-gray for the shutters. I stopped walking, momentarily overcome by the sight. What had begun as a personal challenge had evolved into a profound labor of love. Each decision, from preserving the original river rock fireplace to installing the floor-to-ceiling windows that now gleamed in the morning light, had been deliberate, researched, carefully executed. You okay? Mason asked quietly, noticing my hesitation. Just taking it in, I replied. This might be one of the last times I see it. He rested a hand on my shoulder. Are you sure about selling? You put so much of yourself into this place. I thought about my conversation with Sophia, about the decision that had crystallized in her office. That's exactly why I'm selling it. I refuse to let it become another thing Andrew has taken from me and repurposed for his new life. By selling it, I reclaim control. I decide its fate, not him. We continued along the beach until we reached a small rocky outcropping that provided a perfect vantage point for observing the house without being easily noticed. Mason unpacked his camera with its telephoto lens while I set up a small spotting scope. Through the lens, I could see that changes had already begun. The handcrafted porch swing I'd commissioned from a local woodworker had been replaced by modernist lounge chairs that looked completely at odds with the home's seaside cottage aesthetic. The kitchen windows were open, and I could just make out that the vintage nautical charts I'd framed and hung on the dining area wall were gone, replaced by what looked like abstract canvases in aggressive shades of red. "They're redecorating," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Erasing my work piece by piece." "Got it," Mason murmured, his camera clicking rapidly as he documented these changes. We observed for nearly an hour, noting details that would be important for both the sale documentation and my own understanding of what I would be walking into when the time came for confrontation. Just as we were preparing to leave, the front door opened, and they emerged. Andrew looked the same as he had 6 months ago when he'd announced he needed space. Tall, conventionally handsome in that clean-cut way that had served him well in corporate settings, dressed in casual weekend wear that still somehow managed to look calculated. Vanessa was younger, as I'd expected, her athletic build a testament to her profession as a personal trainer. They were carrying beach towels and a small cooler, clearly heading down for a morning on the sand. I ducked behind the rocks, pulling Mason with me. "Get their departure on camera," I whispered. "I need to know how they secure the house when they leave." Through his telephoto lens, Mason captured images of Andrew locking the front door. Not with a key, but with what appeared to be a new keypad system. I frowned. The original antique door hardware had been another carefully chosen detail, paired with an appropriately vintage lock set that I'd had specially refurbished. "He's changed the locks," I muttered. "Installed some modern keyless system." "Is that a problem for your plan?" Mason asked, continuing to document as Andrew and Vanessa made their way down the private stairs to the beach. "Not at all," I replied. "In fact, it works in our favor. Unauthorized modifications to a separate property, especially security features, just strengthen my position legally." Once they had settled on a spot far down the beach, we retreated to the parking lot and drove into town. Silvercrest's main street was busier than I'd remembered, with several new boutiques and cafes catering to the growing weekend tourist trade. We found a table at Harborview Coffee, a longtime local establishment where Andrew and I had spent countless Sunday mornings during our weekends at the beach house. Over cappuccinos, Mason reviewed the photos he'd taken while I sent a quick update to Sophia. The coastal real estate market was moving even faster than she'd anticipated, and our potential buyer was eager to move forward. She needed information about the current state of the property to adjust our asking price if necessary. "We should go inside," Mason said suddenly, lowering his voice even though no one in the busy cafe was paying us any attention. I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? Seriously? We know they're gone for at least a couple hours. You said you need to document the interior condition for the sale. And you still have a key, right?" "I do, but—" I hesitated, weighing the legal implications. If they've changed the exterior locks, they've probably changed the interior ones too. Mason leaned forward. "But it's still legally your house. Even if they've changed the locks, you're not trespassing by entering your own property." He had a point. Under Connecticut law, the legal owner of a property couldn't be considered a trespasser, regardless of who currently occupied it. And with the house's separate property status firmly established, I was unquestionably that legal owner. "If we're caught," I began. "We won't be caught," Mason interrupted. "They settled on the beach for hours. We go in, document the interior, changes for your lawyer and the potential buyer, and leave. 20 minutes, tops." I considered our options. The interior documentation would indeed strengthen my position with both the sale and any potential legal challenges from Andrew. Without it, we were working with outdated information about the property's condition. "Okay," I decided. "But we don't touch anything. We stay focused on documentation only, and we're in and out as quickly as possible." We paid for our coffees and drove back toward the beach house, this time pulling directly into the long driveway that wound through native coastal vegetation before opening to the circular drive in front of the house. The sight of Andrew's Audi, parked casually in what had always been my spot, sent another jolt of indignation through me. I approached the front door, the familiar weight of my house key in my palm feeling suddenly strange. As expected, it no longer fits the newly installed electronic lock. Now what? Mason asked, glancing nervously down the pathway that led to the beach. I smiled slightly. Now we use the key they don't know about. I walked around to the side of the house, to a small utility entrance partially hidden by beach roses. I had this door installed during the renovation. It leads to the mudroom. Andrew always used the front door or the deck entrance. I doubt he even remembers this exists. The simple keyed deadbolt was unchanged. My key slid in smoothly, and with a quiet click, the door swung open. We stepped into the mudroom I'd designed specifically for the transition between beach and home. Tiled floors that could handle sand, custom built-in storage for beach gear, a small sink for rinsing off shells or sandy hands. But as we moved, from the mudroom into the main living area, I stopped abruptly. The interior transformation was even more dramatic than I'd anticipated. My carefully curated coastal palette of soft blues, whites, and driftwood grays had been replaced by stark whites and bold primary accents that jarred against the home's natural setting. The hand-knotted wool rug that had anchored the living room, a piece I'd commissioned from a Maine artisan, was gone, replaced by what appeared to be mass-produced cowhide. "Holy crap," Mason muttered, raising his camera to capture the changes. "It's like a completely different house." I moved through, the space in stunned silence, noting each alteration, each erasure of my vision. The built-in bookshelves that had flanked the fireplace, designed to showcase both books and the collection of sea glass and shells I'd gathered over years of beach walks, had been painted an aggressive glossy black, their contents now consisting solely of minimalist decorative objects that looked straight from a catalog. In the kitchen, the handcrafted open shelving that had displayed my collection of vintage blue willow china had been removed entirely, replaced by sleek closed cabinetry. The soapstone counters I'd selected for their subtle texture and historical accuracy to the period of the original cottage had been swapped for gleaming white quartz. "It's so generic," I said finally, struggling to articulate the scope of the transformation. "Everything that made this house special, everything connected to its history and setting, they've stripped it away." Mason continued photographing, methodically, creating a thorough record of each modification. "How much of this is Vanessa and how much is Andrew?" I ran my fingers along the edge of the island counter, remembering how I'd worked with the soapstone fabricator to create its gentle curve that echoed the shoreline visible through the windows. "This has Vanessa written all over it. Andrew never cared enough about design to have opinions this strong. He's just going along with it, the same way he went along with my choices before, except he probably tells her how visionary she is, while he dismissed my work as playing house." We continued our documentation, moving upstairs to the primary bedroom suite. The hand-painted compass rose I'd created on the ceiling, positioned precisely to align with true north, had been painted over. The window seat where I'd spent countless early mornings watching the sunrise over the water had been removed to make space for an elaborate workout area with a mirrored wall and exercise equipment. "They've turned my meditation space into a home gym," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. It wasn't just the physical changes that stung, but what they represented. The complete disregard for the thought and care I'd invested in creating spaces that had meaning beyond mere functionality or aesthetic appeal. Mason photographed this final insult, then checked his watch. "We should go. They've been gone almost an hour already." As we headed back downstairs, I paused in the front hallway, noticing something I'd missed on our way in. On the console table, another piece I'd rescued and restored, sat a stack of mail addressed to Andrew and Vanessa Mitchell. Not Andrew Mitchell and Vanessa Kent. Mitchell. As if they were married. As if Vanessa had already assumed my name, my identity, my life. I picked up one of the envelopes, a statement from an interior design firm in Greenwich. Opening it, I found an invoice for Phase 1 renovations, totaling over $58,000, with a notation about Phase 2 structural modifications, scheduled to begin the following month. They're planning major renovations, I said, showing Mason the invoice. Not just redecorating, structural changes. He photographed the document before I carefully replaced it exactly as I'd found it. That's good for your case, right? More unauthorized modifications to your separate property? Very good, I agreed, a cold anger replacing the hurt I'd felt upstairs. And it gives us a timeline. Whatever I'm going to do, it needs to happen before they start knocking down walls. We completed our circuit of the house, exiting through the same side door we'd entered. As Mason locked up, I stood for a moment looking at the exterior of the home I'd rescued, restored, and was now preparing to relinquish on my own terms. The cedar siding still glowed with the honey gold patina that only time and salt air could create. The blue-gray shutters still stood sentinel against coastal storms. The character of the original fisherman's cottage remained visible beneath the thoughtful expansions I'd designed. From the outside, at least, its essential integrity remained intact. You know what bothers me most? I said as we walked back to the car. It's not just that they've moved in, or that they're changing things. It's that they don't see what made this place special to begin with. They're treating it like any other luxury property, a blank canvas for showing off their taste and status. They don't understand its soul. Mason nodded, stowing his camera in the back seat. That's why you're doing the right thing by selling to someone who will appreciate it. From what you've said about this tech executive, they fell in love with the property because of how it connects to its environment and history. They did, I confirmed, feeling more certain than ever about my decision. When Sophia showed them the features article that Coastal Living did on the renovation, they specifically mentioned wanting to preserve the historical elements while updating the systems. As we drove away from Silver Crest, I sent another message to Sophia with a brief summary of what we'd discovered. Her response was immediate. Perfect timing. Buyer's financial verification complete. We can move forward with paperwork Monday morning. Estimated closing, 10 days. 10 days. In just 10 days, the beach house that had represented so much, my independence, my creative vision, the countless hours of restoration work, would belong to someone else. Not to Andrew and Vanessa, but to a buyer of my choosing. Someone who valued the very qualities they were eager to erase, and they had no idea what was coming. So what's next? Mason asked as we rejoined the coastal highway heading back toward the city. I watched Silver Crest recede in the passenger mirror, a plan crystallizing in my mind, not just for reclaiming control of my property, but for ensuring that Andrew understood exactly what his betrayal had cost him. Next, I said, we prepare for the closing, and then for my final visit to Silver Crest. Monday morning arrived with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Before the divorce, before Andrew's betrayal, my days had begun with a vague sense of compromise, balancing my own ambitions against the expectations of being Mrs. Andrew Mitchell, supportive wife and hostess. Now, as I prepared for my 9 a.m. meeting with Sophia, I dressed with deliberate intention, a structured navy blazer over a simple white blouse, tailored pants, and the sapphire earrings my grandmother Catherine had left me along with the inheritance that had purchased Silver Crest. These weren't just clothes, they were armor. Sophia's office was busier than it had been during our early Saturday meeting. Her assistant directed me to the conference room where Sophia was already setting up, spreading documents across the polished mahogany table with practiced efficiency. Perfect timing, she said, looking up as I entered. We've got a lot to cover. I set my laptop bag down and pulled out the flash drive containing Mason's photographs from our reconnaissance mission. We documented everything, all the changes they've made, the plans for structural renovations, even mail addressed to them jointly as if they're already married. Sophia arched an eyebrow. You went inside? It's my house, I replied simply. Legally, I can't trespass on my own property, regardless of who's currently occupying it. A slight smile touched her lips. I won't ask for details on how you gained entry. Let's just say these photographs will be extremely helpful in establishing the extent of unauthorized modifications to your separate property. She gestured to the chair beside her. Let's review what we have and develop our strategy. For the next hour, we methodically assessed my position. Sophia had already received full financial verification from the potential buyer, Elizabeth Caldwell, a tech executive whose privacy requirements meshed perfectly with our need for discretion. The offer was firm, $2.4 million all cash, with a 10-day closing period and minimal contingencies. She's waiving the home inspection, Sophia noted, based on the renovation documentation you provided and Mason's recent photos. Her only condition is a final walkthrough the day before closing, which we can easily schedule when Andrew and Vanessa are out, I confirmed, thinking of their predictable beach routine we'd observed on Saturday. We moved on to the legal implications. Sophia had prepared a comprehensive brief outlining exactly why the sale was permissible without Andrew's knowledge or consent, citing specific language from our prenuptial agreement about separate property and the documentation proving the house had been purchased with my inheritance funds. Connecticut law is very clear on this, she explained. With a valid prenuptial agreement specifically designating inherited funds as separate property, and clear documentation showing the property was purchased primarily with those funds, you have full legal right to sell without spousal consent, even during pending divorce proceedings. I nodded, relieved but not surprised. I'd been meticulous about maintaining separate accounts for my inheritance, precisely because some part of me had always recognized Andrew's tendency to appropriate and claim ownership of things that weren't his. What about their possessions? I asked. They clearly have clothes, personal items, and new furniture in the house. Sophia pulled out another document. I've drafted a formal notice requiring removal of personal property within 48 hours of closing. It's generous, legally speaking. Courts typically allow only 24 hours in similar situations. I thought about the aggressive timeline. And if they refuse or don't remove everything in time? Then any remaining items become legally abandoned property. You, or rather the new owner, would be within legal rights to have them removed and placed in storage at Andrew's expense, or disposed of entirely. She handed me the document. But I recommend having a moving company on standby either way. The cleaner the transition, the fewer complications afterward. We continued our strategic planning, addressing every potential complication. Sophia had already prepared the necessary legal notices and coordinated with the title company to expedite the closing process. She'd also engaged a private security firm specializing in property transitions, a precaution in case the confrontation turned volatile. I don't anticipate Andrew becoming physically aggressive, I said, but Vanessa is an unknown quantity, and they'll both be shocked, possibly desperate. Better safe than sorry, Sophia agreed. My experience with divorce cases involving sudden property transfers suggests having neutral third parties present during the final confrontation. As we wrapped up the formal planning, Sophia closed her legal pad and fixed me with a more personal look. Olivia, there's something else we need to discuss. The emotional aftermath. Have you thought about what comes next, after Silver Crest is sold? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the immediate goal, reclaiming control of my property, and denying Andrew the satisfaction of appropriating it, that I hadn't fully considered life beyond that victory. I suppose I'll finalize the divorce and move forward, I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Sophia leaned back, her expression thoughtful. In my 30 years practicing family law, I've seen countless clients focus all their energy on winning a particular battle, only to find themselves adrift when that battle ends. The Silver Crest House clearly represented something important to you. Independence, creative vision, a connection to your grandmother's legacy. Once it's sold, what will anchor those values in your life? The question lingered as I left her office and walked toward the waterfront. The morning had turned, bright and clear, with sailboats dotting the harbor and seagulls wheeling overhead. I found a bench facing the water and sat, letting Sophia's question settle into my thoughts. What would anchor me after Silver Crest? Before I could explore the question further, my phone rang. It was Jessica Reed, my oldest friend and the historical architecture consultant who had helped me plan many aspects of the beach house renovation. "I just got the strangest call," she said without preamble. "A woman named Vanessa Kent contacted me about consulting on structural modifications to a property in Silver Crest. When she described the location, I realized it had to be your beach house." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd need to consult my schedule and get back to her." "I wanted to talk to you first." Jessica paused. "Liv, what's going on? Are you and Andrew selling the place?" I hadn't told Jessica about Andrew's betrayal or Vanessa's identity, not because I didn't trust her, but because verbalizing it would have made it undeniably real. But now circumstances demand honesty. Andrew moved his mistress, who happens to be Vanessa, into Silver Crest without my knowledge or permission. They're redecorating and apparently planning significant renovations, all without legal right to do so. Jessica's sharp intake of breath carried clearly through the phone. "That absolute—" She cut herself off. "I'm so sorry, Liv. What are you going to do?" I hesitated only briefly before deciding to trust her with the full plan. Jessica had been there from the beginning of the Silver Crest project, understood what it meant to me, and had professional discretion I could rely on. "I'm selling my house," I said simply. "The closing is in 10 days. Andrew and Vanessa have no idea." There was a moment of silence before Jessica spoke again. "That's brilliantly ruthless. Do you need any help?" I smiled, grateful for her immediate support. "Actually, yes. I need someone to distract Vanessa, keep her thinking her renovation plans are moving forward until the sale is complete. If you could schedule a consultation with her, string her along just enough to maintain the illusion." "Say no more," Jessica replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll set up a meeting for next week, ask for detailed plans, and the works. She'll never suspect a thing." After ending the call with Jessica, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was legally mine. It was about assembling a strategic response to Andrew's betrayal that would be both legally unassailable and emotionally devastating. He had discounted my abilities for years, treating my attention to detail as a quaint personality quirk rather than the powerful tool it actually was. Now that same meticulous planning would become his undoing. I opened my laptop and began drafting a checklist of everything that needed to happen in the next 10 days. The legal paperwork was in Sophia's capable hands. Jessica would keep Vanessa distracted with renovation consultations. Mason had documented the current state of the property. What remained was coordinating the actual transition, ensuring that I was present with the final sale documents at precisely the right moment. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Elizabeth Caldwell. Sophia gave me your contact information. I wanted to thank you personally for considering my offer on the Silver Crest property. The privacy and historical character are exactly what I've been searching for." I responded carefully, maintaining professional distance while acknowledging her interest. "The house is special. I'm pleased it will go to someone who appreciates its unique qualities." Elizabeth's reply came quickly. "I understand you've put significant work into the restoration. I'd love to learn more about the architectural choices you made, if you're willing to share that information." The request sparked an unexpected emotional response. After Andrew's dismissal of my work and Vanessa's methodical erasure of my design choices, Elizabeth's genuine interest in the thoughtful restoration felt like validation. I found myself agreeing to meet her for coffee later that week, not just as a seller to buyer, but as one preservationist to another. As I continued working on my transition plan, another call came in, this time from Andrew himself. I stared at his name on the screen, my finger hovering over the decline button. But strategic assessment required information, and speaking with him might provide valuable insights into his current thinking and schedule. "Hello, Andrew," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Rebecca," he replied, using the formal version of my name as he always did when approaching a negotiation. "We need to discuss the property division. I've been trying to reach you about this for days." I could hear the familiar rhythm of waves in the background. He was calling from Silver Crest, probably standing on the same wraparound porch where I'd spent countless mornings watching the sunrise. "What about it?" I asked, matching his businesslike tone. "I've had the portfolio evaluated by Patterson Financial," he said, naming his favorite investment advisor. "Based on current market values, we should be able to reach an equitable split without involving the courts. Vanessa and I will keep the beach house, you take the city condo and liquid investments. Clean break, minimal legal complications." The audacity was breathtaking. Not only was he attempting to claim my separate property as a marital asset, but he was positioning it as if he were doing me a favor by offering this equitable division. "That's an interesting proposal," I said carefully, unwilling to tip my hand. "I'll need time to review the numbers with my financial advisor." Andrew's sigh carried the familiar note of impatience I'd heard countless times during our marriage, the sound he made when he believed someone was being unnecessarily cautious or detail-oriented. "There's no need to overcomplicate this, Liv. The valuations are straightforward. The condo's worth about $1.8 million in the current market, the beach house just under $2.4. With the liquid assets factored in, you actually come out slightly ahead." My heart skipped a beat at his valuation of Silver Crest, exactly matching Elizabeth Caldwell's offer. Andrew had no idea how accurately he had priced the property he was about to lose. "I'll still need time to review," I insisted. "And I'd like a complete accounting of any modifications you've made to the beach house since moving in. Those would affect valuation." "We've made some minor updates," he said dismissively. "Nothing structural, just cosmetic improvements to modernize the space. A bit. Vanessa has excellent taste." The blatant lie confirmed what I'd suspected. Andrew was deliberately concealing the extent of their changes, probably because he knew they constituted unauthorized modifications to separate property. "When do you need my answer?" I asked, steering the conversation toward the information I actually needed. "Sooner rather than later. We're planning to start some more significant renovations next month, and it would be cleaner to have the property division settled before then." He paused. "Actually, why don't you come up to Silver Crest this weekend? We can discuss it in person, show you the improvements we've made. Might help you see that this is the right decision." The invitation was unexpected, but perfect for my purposes. Andrew was inadvertently offering me exactly the opportunity I needed, a scheduled time to be at the property with both of them present. "This weekend?" I pretended to check my calendar. "I could drive up Saturday morning. Would that work?" "Perfect," Andrew agreed, sounding pleased with himself. "Around 11? We'll have brunch ready." After ending the call, I immediately texted, "Sophia." Andrew invited me to Silver Crest this Saturday at 11 a.m. to discuss property division. Perfect timing for our final plan. Her response was immediate. "Ideal. I'll coordinate with the title company to have final sale documents ready. By Friday, security team on standby for Saturday." Next, I messaged Mason. "Final confrontation scheduled for Saturday, 11 a.m. Need you there as witness and support." "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Want me to bring bail money just in case?" I smiled at his attempted humor, but the question underscored the unpredictable nature of what lay ahead. How would Andrew react when he realized the extent of my countermove? How would Vanessa respond to learning that her renovation plans and forever home were about to be sold out from under her? For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being unnecessarily vindictive? Would it be simpler to just let them have the beach house, take the financial equivalent, and move on with my life? Then I remembered the compass rose I'd painstakingly painted on the bedroom ceiling, now covered over with flat white paint. I thought of the window seat where I'd watched countless sunrises, torn out to make room for exercise equipment. I recalled the vintage blue willow china I'd collected piece by piece from local antique shops, likely boxed up in some storage area, replaced by anonymous modern dinnerware. This wasn't about the property's monetary value. It was about refusing to let Andrew once again appropriate my work, my vision, my separate identity, and rebrand it as his own. It was about demonstrating, in terms he couldn't possibly misinterpret, that I was no longer the accommodating wife who would sacrifice her own dreams for his convenience. My heart skipped a beat at his valuation of Silver Crest, exactly matching Elizabeth Caldwell's offer. Andrew had no idea how accurately he had priced the property he was about to lose. "I'll still need time to review," I insisted. "And I'd like a complete accounting of any modifications you've made to the beach house since moving in. Those would affect valuation." "We've made some minor updates," he said dismissively. "Nothing structural, just cosmetic improvements to modernize the space." "A bit. Vanessa has excellent taste." The blatant lie confirmed what I'd suspected. Andrew was deliberately concealing the extent of their changes, probably because he knew they constituted unauthorized modifications to separate property. "When do you need my answer?" I asked, steering the conversation toward the information I actually needed. "Sooner rather than later. We're planning to start some more significant renovations next month, and it would be cleaner to have the property division settled before then." He paused. "Actually, why don't you come up to Silver Crest this weekend? We can discuss it in person, show you the improvements we've made. Might help you see that this is the right decision." The invitation was unexpected, but perfect for my purposes. Andrew was inadvertently offering me exactly the opportunity I needed, a scheduled time to be at the property with both of them present. "This weekend?" I pretended to check my calendar. "I could drive up Saturday morning. Would that work?" "Perfect," Andrew agreed, sounding pleased with himself. "Around 11? We'll have brunch ready." After ending the call, I immediately texted Sophia. Andrew invited me to Silver Crest this Saturday at 11 a.m. to discuss property division. Perfect timing for our final plan. Her response was immediate. "Ideal. I'll coordinate with the title company to have final sale documents ready by Friday. Security team on standby for Saturday." Next, I messaged Mason. "Final confrontation scheduled for Saturday, 11 a.m. Need you there as witness and support." "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Want me to bring bail money just in case?" I smiled at his attempted humor, but the question underscored the unpredictable nature of what lay ahead. How would Andrew react when he realized the extent of my countermove? How would Vanessa respond to learning that her renovation plans and forever home were about to be sold out from under her? For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being unnecessarily vindictive? Would it be simpler to just let them have the beach house, take the financial equivalent, and move on with my life? Then I remembered the compass rose I'd painstakingly painted on the bedroom ceiling, now covered over with flat white paint. I thought of the window seat where I'd watched countless sunrises, torn out to make room for exercise equipment. I recalled the vintage blue willow china I'd collected piece by piece from local antique shops, likely boxed up in some storage area, replaced by anonymous modern dinnerware. This wasn't about the property's monetary value. It was about refusing to let Andrew once again appropriate my work, my vision, my separate identity, and rebrand it as his own. It was about demonstrating, in terms he couldn't possibly misinterpret, that I was no longer the accommodating wife who would sacrifice her own dreams for his convenience. "I should tell you," I said as we prepared to leave. "The current occupants have made some changes. They've painted over certain features, removed others." Elizabeth nodded, unsurprised. Sophia mentioned there had been some unauthorized modifications. "That doesn't concern me. Most can be reversed. The important elements, the structural integrity, the orientation to the coastline, the historical features, remain intact." Her words lifted a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged. The changes Andrew and Vanessa had made were cosmetic. The essence of what I'd created still existed beneath their superficial alterations. Thursday brought a flurry of activity. Jessica called to report that her consultation with Vanessa had gone exactly as planned. She's completely clueless, Jessica reported. I spent 2 hours at the house yesterday discussing her vision for structural modifications. She wants to remove the wall between the kitchen and dining room to create an entertainment space. I winced at the thought. That wall contained one of the original structural elements of the fisherman's cottage, carefully preserved and integrated into the renovation. The best part, Jessica continued, is that I scheduled our follow-up planning session for next Wednesday. Conveniently, after your Saturday confrontation, she has no idea the house won't even be hers by then. Did you see Andrew? I asked, briefly. He came home while I was there, said hello, then retreated to his home office. Seemed completely disinterested in the renovation plans, to be honest. This is clearly Vanessa's project, not his. That matched my understanding of Andrew. He had never cared about the design or historical aspects of Silvercrest, only its status value as a prestigious address. Now he was letting Vanessa remake it according to her tastes, the same way he had once allowed me to design it according to mine. The difference was that my name was on the deed, and my separate funds had paid for it. Later that day, I received confirmation from the moving company Sophia had engaged. They would arrive at Silvercrest promptly at 1 p.m. on Saturday, 2 hours after my scheduled confrontation began, to pack and remove any personal items belonging to me that remained in the house. I had prepared a detailed inventory, focusing primarily on sentimental objects and specialized tools I'd used during the renovation. The private security team checked in as well, confirming they would arrive discreetly at 10:45 a.m. on Saturday, positioning themselves nearby but out of sight unless needed. Their presence was a precaution that Sophia had insisted upon, though I still believed Andrew's reaction would be more emotional than physical. By Friday morning, everything was in place. I arrived at Sophia's office precisely at 3:30 p.m., dressed in a structured blazer and pencil skirt that projected calm authority. The closing would take place in the conference room, with the title company representative already setting up when I arrived. Nervous? Sophia asked quietly as we waited for Elizabeth to arrive. Strangely, no, I replied, and it was true. The tumult of emotions I'd experienced since Mason's late-night text message had settled into a steady resolve. This wasn't an impulsive action but a carefully considered response, legally sound and emotionally necessary. Elizabeth arrived precisely on time, bringing with her a financial advisor who verified the wire transfer of funds while the title company representative prepared the final paperwork. The actual closing process was remarkably anticlimactic, a series of signatures, initials, and formal statements that took less than 30 minutes to complete. "Congratulations," the title representative said, handing Elizabeth a folder containing the new deed. "You're now the legal owner of the Silvercrest property." Elizabeth turned to me, her expression a mixture of excitement and recognition of the bittersweet moment this represented for me. "I promise to be a good steward," she said. Simply, Sophia had prepared a letter formally transferring possession, to be delivered to Andrew and Vanessa the following day. It outlined the 48-hour period they had to remove their personal belongings and provided contact information for the property. Management company Elizabeth had engaged to oversee the transition. "You're sure you want to deliver this in person?" Sophia asked as she handed me the sealed envelope. "I could have a courier service handle it, or even better, a process server." "I'm sure," I confirmed. "This needs to be face-to-face. I want to see Andrew's expression when he realizes what's happened." Mason picked me up at my apartment early Saturday morning. I had barely slept, not from anxiety but from a strange, buzzing anticipation. The ivory linen dress I'd chosen hung ready on my closet door, along with a lightweight cashmere cardigan for the coastal breeze. "You look calm," Mason observed as I slid into the passenger seat, the manila envelope containing the transfer of possession documents secure in my leather portfolio. I am calm, I replied, surprising myself with how true it was. This feels right. Necessary. Necessary revenge, Mason said with a slight smile. I considered his characterization. Not exactly revenge, more like restoration of balance. For years, I compromised what I wanted to accommodate Andrew's preferences. I let him take credit for my work, dismiss my passion, treat my inheritance as a communal resource while maintaining strict boundaries around his earnings. I watched the cityscape give way to suburbs, then to the coastal landscape as we drove. This is about demonstrating to him and to myself that those days are over. We arrived at Silvercrest at 10:40 a.m., deliberately early. As planned, the security team was already in position. 2 professionals in unmarked vehicles parked discreetly along the main road, virtually invisible unless you knew to look for them. One nodded subtly as we drove past, confirming their presence. Rather than pulling directly into the driveway, Mason parked in the same public beach access lot we'd used during our reconnaissance mission. We had 20 minutes before our scheduled arrival, time to prepare and center ourselves for what was to come. We walked along the shoreline, the familiar rhythm of waves against sand providing a soothing backdrop to my final visit to Silvercrest as its former owner. The morning was perfect. Clear blue skies, gulls wheeling overhead, the scent of salt air mingling with beach roses that grew wild along the dunes. "Are you having second thoughts?" Mason asked as we paused to watch a pair of sandpipers darting. Along the water's edge, I considered the question honestly. No, I'm sad about losing the house, of course. It represented something important, my first major project, my independence, my connection to Grandma Catherine. But selling it was my choice. That makes all the difference. At precisely 10:55 a.m., we made our way back to the car to retrieve my portfolio and a small bag containing items I wanted to collect from the house. The ivory dress moved with me in the gentle breeze, its familiar fabric a physical reminder of the day I'd first taken possession of Silvercrest, full of anticipation, ideas, and independence. "Ready?" Mason asked as we approached the long driveway, leading to the house. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of clarity, as if every decision I'd made over the past 2 weeks had been leading inevitably to this moment. "Ready." We drove slowly up the winding drive, beach roses and native grasses, lining the path I'd carefully landscaped to blend with the natural coastal environment. As we rounded the final curve, the house came into full view, cedar siding glowing honey gold in the morning light, blue-gray shutters framing the expansive windows, the wraparound porch where I'd spent countless mornings watching the sunrise. Over the Atlantic. Both Andrew's Audi and Vanessa's red convertible were parked in the circular drive, confirming they were home and waiting for me. Mason pulled up behind them and cut the engine, turning to me one last time. "Remember, I'm right here with you. If things get uncomfortable, we leave immediately. The security team is just a text away." I squeezed his hand gratefully. "Thank you. For everything." The front door opened as we approached, revealing Andrew standing on the threshold. He was dressed casually but deliberately in the blue button-down shirt I'd always said brought out his eyes, paired with khaki shorts and boat shoes. Coastal, casual calculated to project relaxed affluence. "Liv," he greeted me, his expression a practiced mixture of warmth and slight contrition. "And Mason, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." The momentary tightening around his eyes betrayed his displeasure at the unexpected witness. "Last-minute addition," I replied smoothly. "I hope that's not a problem." "Of course not," Andrew said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He stepped back, gesturing us inside. "Come in. Vanessa's just finishing up brunch preparations." The interior of Silvercrest felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The bones of the home I'd created were still visible beneath the aggressive modernization Vanessa had implemented. The entryway still featured the reclaimed heart pine flooring I'd personally sanded and finished, though the antique console table I'd restored had been replaced by a sleek, soulless piece that looked like it came from a high-end furniture catalog. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was younger than I'd expected from the social media photos, perhaps early 30s to Andrew's 45, with the toned physique of someone who made fitness her profession. "Olivia," she said, her voice overly bright. "It's good to finally meet you. Andrew has told me so much about you." I doubted that very much, but nodded politely. "Vanessa, this is my brother Mason." An awkward silence descended as we stood in the entry hall, the usual social scripts inadequate for this unusual situation. Andrew broke it first, gesturing toward the dining area visible through the archway. "Shall we?" Vanessa's prepared quite a spread. Indeed, she had. The dining table, my custom driftwood piece thankfully unchanged, was set with an elaborate brunch display, a quiche, fresh fruit arranged artfully on platters, a basket of pastries, a pitcher of what appeared to be mimosas. "This looks lovely," I said, not moving toward the table. "But before we eat, there's something we need to discuss." Andrew's expression shifted subtly, the practiced warmth receding, replaced by the more calculating look I recognized from countless business negotiations. "Of course," he said, gesturing toward the living room. "Perhaps we should sit." We moved to the seating area overlooking the ocean. I deliberately chose the weathered leather armchair I'd found at an estate sale and had painstakingly restored, one of the few original pieces that hadn't been replaced in Vanessa's redecoration efforts. Andrew and Vanessa took the new white sofa positioned across from it, while Mason remained standing, positioned slightly behind my chair. "I've been reviewing your proposal about the property division," I began, carefully setting my portfolio on the coffee table between us. "Excellent," Andrew said, leaning forward eagerly. "I think you'll find it's quite fair. The condo's value has actually increased since my initial estimate." I raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Before we get into the details, I want to clarify something about Silver Crest." Vanessa shifted slightly, her expression suddenly wary. Andrew's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What about it?" he asked, his tone deliberately casual. I maintained direct eye contact as I spoke, my voice steady. "This house was purchased with my inheritance from Grandma Catherine. Our prenuptial agreement specifically designates it as my separate property." Andrew waved a dismissive hand. "Technicalities live. We lived here together, maintained it together. Any court would recognize it as marital property at this point, regardless of initial funding." "That's not accurate," I replied calmly. "And I think you know that, which is why you've avoided consulting an actual attorney about your property division proposal." His jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. "The legal details can be worked out. The important thing is finding an equitable solution that works for everyone." "An equitable solution," I repeated. "Like moving your girlfriend into my separate property without permission? Like redecorating the home I spent 3 years restoring without consultation? Like planning structural renovations to historical features I specifically preserved?" Vanessa flushed, looking to Andrew for support. He maintained his composed expression, though I could see the muscles in his neck tensing. "We've made some updates." "Yes, improvements actually. The place needed modernizing." I opened my portfolio and removed the manila envelope Sophia had prepared, placing it on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" Andrew asked, not reaching for it. "Legal notification," I replied. I thought it would be appropriate to deliver it in person. Andrew's expression darkened. "What kind of notification?" The moment had arrived. The culmination of 2 weeks of strategic planning, legal consultation, and emotional preparation. I took a deep breath, feeling strangely calm as I delivered the words that would irrevocably alter our relationship. "This property was legally sold yesterday afternoon. The new owner has authorized me to inform you that you have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings. Anything remaining after that time will be considered abandoned property." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the constant background rhythm of waves seemed to pause as Andrew and Vanessa processed what I had just said. "That's not possible," Andrew finally managed, his voice strained. "You can't sell the house without my consent." "Actually, I can." And I did. I maintained steady eye contact. "The sale closed yesterday at 4 p.m. Elizabeth Caldwell is now the legal owner of Silver Crest." For a moment, Andrew's face went completely blank, as if his brain were rebooting after encountering an impossible error. Vanessa looked from him to me and back again, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "You're bluffing," Andrew finally said, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. I pulled the next document from my portfolio, a copy of the executed sale agreement with Elizabeth Caldwell's signature clearly visible alongside my own. I placed it on the table next to the legal notification. "The funds have already been transferred. The deed has been recorded with the county." I maintained eye contact with Andrew. "Silver Crest no longer belongs to either of us." Andrew snatched up the sale agreement, scanning it with the rapid expertise of someone accustomed to dissecting contracts. I watched as his eyes locked on the sale price, $2.4 million, exactly the valuation he had cited in his property division proposal. This is, he struggled to find words, his usual eloquence deserting him. "Fraud," Vanessa interjected, her voice tight with anger. "You can't sell property during divorce proceedings. It's illegal." I turned to her calmly. "That would be true for marital property, Vanessa. But Silver Crest was established as my separate property in our prenuptial agreement. Connecticut law is quite clear that I retain full right to sell without spousal consent." Andrew rose abruptly, the sale document crumpling in his fist. "No judge will uphold this. I'll have it reversed by Monday morning." Mason shifted his stance slightly, moving closer to my chair, but I remained perfectly still, maintaining the calm composure I'd practiced for this moment. "You're welcome to try," I replied, "but the prenuptial agreement you signed explicitly states that any property purchased with my inheritance remains my separate property. The purchase documents clearly show Silver Crest was bought with those funds. The deed was primarily in my name." I paused, allowing the legal reality to sink in. "Sophia has prepared extensive documentation anticipating any challenge you might make." Vanessa turned to Andrew, her expression shifting from anger to uncertainty. "You said the house would be part of the divorce settlement. You said it was jointly owned." The accusation in her tone was unmistakable. Andrew avoided her gaze, focusing his attention on me. "Who is Elizabeth Caldwell?" he demanded. "Some friend of yours participating in this scheme?" "She's a tech executive from San Francisco looking for a coastal retreat," I replied simply. "She particularly appreciates the historical elements of the property, the original fireplace, the heart pine flooring, and the preserved structural features of the fisherman's cottage. Elements you were planning to remove in your upcoming renovations." Andrew's eyes widened slightly, and I knew he was wondering exactly how much I knew about their plans. "This is vindictive, Liv," he said, shifting tactics. "I understand you're hurt about our separation, about Vanessa. But destroying something you loved just to spite me is beneath you." I felt a flash of genuine amusement at his transparent attempt to manipulate my emotions. The old Olivia might have been swayed by such an appeal, might have questioned her own motivations, might have sought to avoid being seen as petty or vindictive. But Olivia had disappeared the moment I'd discovered they had moved into my beach house without permission. "This isn't about spite, Andrew," I said evenly. "It's about consequences. You moved into my separate property without consent. You began modifying it without permission. You formulated plans to claim it in the divorce settlement despite having no legal right to do so." I gestured toward the notification on the table. "These are simply the natural consequences of those actions. Vanessa sank back onto the white sofa, the reality of the situation finally penetrating. We have to leave? All of our things. The new furniture, our clothes. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings, I confirmed. A moving company. Will arrive at 1 p.m. today to collect my remaining items. I suggest you use the time to make your own arrangements. Andrew's face had flushed an angry red. This is our home. We've been living here for months. There are tenancy laws, which don't apply to unauthorized occupants of separate property, I interrupted smoothly, especially when there's a specific clause in the prenuptial agreement prohibiting occupation with a new partner without written permission. I turned to Vanessa. Permission I never granted. Andrew began pacing, his careful facade of reasonableness completely abandoned. I'll fight this. You'll lose, I stated simply. And you know it. That's why you're angry rather than confident. He stopped pacing and stared at me, seeing something in my expression he hadn't anticipated. For 12 years I had been the accommodating wife, the one who deferred to his greater expertise in legal and financial matters, the one who sought compromise rather than confrontation. That woman was gone. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice lower. Money? Is that it? I'll buy the house from this Caldwell woman. Name your price. It's not for sale, I replied. Not to you. Elizabeth is aware of the situation and has no interest in selling at any price. Vanessa stood suddenly, her composure cracking. This is insane. All of our plans, the renovations. We've already ordered custom cabinetry for the kitchen, scheduled contractors. I suggest you contact them immediately to cancel, I advised calmly. Those modifications won't be happening. As if on cue, my phone chimed with a text message from the moving company. ETA 20 minutes. Confirming we should proceed as scheduled? I showed the message to Andrew and Vanessa. The movers will be here shortly to collect my personal items. I'd recommend using this time to begin organizing your own belongings. Andrew's expression hardened into something I'd rarely seen during our marriage, pure, undisguised hostility. You've changed, Liv. This calculating, vindictive person. This isn't you. I considered his words, testing them against my own sense of self. Had I changed? Yes, unquestionably. But not in the way he suggested. This isn't vindictiveness, Andrew. It's clear. For years I compromised what I wanted to accommodate what you needed. I let you take credit for my financial strategies, dismiss my passion for restoration as a cute hobby, treat my inheritance as a resource while maintaining strict boundaries around your own assets. I rose from the chair, standing at my full height. The person you're seeing now has always existed. She was just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Vanessa had moved to the windows overlooking the ocean, her back to us, arms wrapped around herself in a defensive posture. The silence, stretched between us, broken only by the familiar rhythm of waves against the shoreline below. Andrew's phone rang, shattering the tense standoff. He glanced at the screen, hesitated, then answered, stepping away toward the kitchen. From his clipped responses, I gathered it was his attorney, probably responding to a panicked message sent while I'd been speaking. Mason moved to my side. You okay? He asked quietly. I nodded, surprising myself with how true it was. The confrontation was unfolding almost exactly as I'd anticipated, yet I felt none of the emotional turmoil I'd expected. Instead, there was a strange sense of peace, of rightness, in finally standing firm on my own behalf. Andrew returned, his expression a mixture of frustration and resignation. Walter says the sale is likely legal given the prenuptial language, he admitted grudgingly, but he's looking into other options. This isn't over. For Silvercrest it is, I replied simply. The house has a new owner now, one who will preserve what matters rather than erasing it. Vanessa turned from the window, her initial shock now hardened into bitter anger. You've had this planned all along, haven't you? Waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate us. Actually, I began planning. The moment I received a text showing you had moved in without permission, I corrected her. Before that, I had every intention of maintaining ownership of Silver Crest indefinitely. A car door slammed outside, followed by voices and footsteps on the gravel drive. The moving company had arrived. That will be my movers, I said, reaching for my portfolio. They'll be collecting the remaining items on my inventory list. I suggest you stay out of their way. Andrew's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. We need to talk about this. Alone. There has to be a solution. Mason moved forward immediately, but I shook my head slightly, letting him know I could handle this. I looked pointedly at Andrew's hand until he released me, then met his gaze directly. There was a time for talking, Andrew. It was before you moved your girlfriend into my house without permission. It was before you began erasing my work and planning structural changes to a property you had no right to modify. I picked up my portfolio. That time has passed. The front door opened as the moving company supervisor knocked and entered, clipboard in hand. Miss Parker, we're here for the scheduled pickup. Perfect timing, I replied, turning away from Andrew. I'll show you what needs to be collected. For the next 45 minutes, I directed the movers through the house, identifying the items. On my inventory list, primarily personal effects and specialized tools I'd used during the renovation. Andrew and Vanessa retreated to the primary bedroom, their heated whispers occasionally audible as they debated their options and assigned blame. In the kitchen, I found my collection of vintage blue willow china stacked carelessly in a lower cabinet, replaced on the open shelving by sleek, minimalist dinnerware in stark white. The discovery sparked a fresh wave of satisfaction in my decision to sell. These pieces I had collected over years, each with its own story and provenance, had been deemed insufficiently modern for Vanessa's aesthetic vision. I carefully wrapped each plate, bowl, and cup in the packing material the movers provided, securing my collection for transport back to my apartment. As I worked, I found myself mentally saying goodbye to Silver Crest. Not with regret, but with a sense of completion, of a chapter properly concluded. The weathered cedar siding that glowed golden in the morning light. The blue-gray shutters I'd color-matched to the ocean during winter storms. The wraparound porch where I'd spent countless hours watching the play of light on water. The river rock fireplace I'd painstakingly restored, uncovering the masons' initials carved in 1891. These physical features would remain, now under Elizabeth's stewardship. What I was taking with me was something less tangible, but more important. The confidence, vision, and independence that creating Silver Crest had awakened in me. As the movers finished loading the last of my items, Mason joined me on the wraparound. Porch? Ready to go? He asked quietly. I nodded, taking a final look at the view I'd fallen in love with 3 years earlier. The gentle curve of the cove, the distant lighthouse on the point, the endless horizon where sky meets sea. I thought this would be harder, I admitted. Saying goodbye. Mason studied my expression. And it's not? Strangely, no. The house will always be part of my story, but I don't need to possess it to honor that. Elizabeth will care for it. That's enough. Andrew appeared in the doorway behind us, his expression carefully composed once more, though the strain showed around his eyes. This isn't how I wanted things to end between us, Liv, he said, his tone deliberately conciliatory. Despite everything, we had 12 good years together. I turned to face him, considering his words. There have been good years, yes. Times when our partnership had seemed solid, when his ambition had complemented my caution, when his confidence had balanced my careful planning. We did, I acknowledged. But then you moved your mistress into my beach house and tried to claim it as your own. I smiled slightly. Actions have consequences, Andrew. Consider this a valuable lesson in property law and prenuptial enforcement. His facade cracked again, revealing the anger simmering beneath. Is that all this was to you? A legal exercise? No, I replied honestly. It was a reclamation. Of my property rights, certainly, but more importantly, of my own agency. For years, I allowed you to dismiss what mattered to me, to paint my caution as anxiety, my attention to detail as overthinking, my passion for restoration as merely decorative rather than substantive. I gestured toward the house behind him. Silvercrest proved you wrong on every count. My vision created something of lasting value. My careful planning protected it legally. My attention to detail made it worth fighting for. Andrew shook his head, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't further reveal his miscalculation. The moving company supervisor approached with a clipboard. All items on the inventory list have been loaded, Ms. Parker. We'll deliver to your apartment as arranged. Is there anything else you need today? No, that's everything. Thank you. I signed the form he offered, then turned back to Andrew. Remember, you have until Monday at 11 a.m. to remove all personal belongings. Elizabeth's property manager will be here at that time to change the locks and begin preparations for her arrival. Mason and I walked down the porch steps toward his waiting car. Behind us, I heard the door close with a definitive click. As we drove down the winding driveway, beach roses and native grasses blurring alongside, I felt a sudden, unexpected lightness. The confrontation I had spent 2 weeks preparing for was over. Silvercrest no longer belonged to me, but neither did it belong to Andrew and Vanessa. My separate property had remained separate, disposed of according to my wishes rather than appropriated for their new life together. Where to now? Mason asked as we reached the main road. I considered the question, both its immediate practical meaning and its broader implication for my life moving forward. First, lunch at Harbor Point Cafe, I decided. I could use some of their clam chowder. After this morning, then back to the city. I have a meeting with a real estate agent on Monday. Mason raised an eyebrow. Looking for a new place already? Actually, yes, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. Something different from Silvercrest. Not a renovation project this time, but a place with good bones and history. Maybe one of those brownstones in the historic district I've always admired. A fresh start, Mason observed. Exactly. I watched Silvercrest disappear from view in the side mirror, the cedar siding catching the midday sun one last time, but one that builds on everything I've learned about restoration, about legal protection, and most importantly, about myself. As we continued down the coastal highway, I realized the bittersweet pang I'd anticipated feeling upon leaving Silvercrest for the last time hadn't materialized. In its place was something unexpected, a quiet excitement about what lay ahead, unencumbered by the weight of a failing marriage or the constraints of being Mrs. Andrew Mitchell. The woman in the ivory linen dress sitting beside Mason wasn't just leaving behind a beloved beach house. She was driving toward a future she would shape entirely on her own terms. The Harbor Point Cafe hadn't changed in the years I'd been coming to Silvercrest. The same weathered sign swung gently in the sea breeze. The same bell chimed as we pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of clam chowder and freshly baked bread enveloped us as we entered. Marianne, the owner who had fed me countless meals during the beach house renovation, looked up from behind the counter and broke into a wide smile. Olivia Parker, where have you been hiding yourself? She called, wiping her hands on her apron as she came around to greet me with a warm hug. I haven't seen you in months. It's been a complicated time, I replied, returning her embrace. But it's good to be back, even if just for lunch. She led us to my favorite window table overlooking the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings and seagulls wheeled overhead. The usual? She asked, already knowing the answer. Please. Your chowder and sourdough might be exactly what I need today. After she'd gone to place our order, Mason studied me across the table. You seem different, lighter somehow. I considered his observation, testing it against my internal state. I think I am. The confrontation with Andrew, it went almost exactly as I'd anticipated, but I expected to feel more, I don't know, turmoil about it. Instead, I just feel clear, resolved. No regrets about selling Silvercrest? Surprisingly, no. I gazed out at the familiar harbor view. I thought there would be this moment of devastating loss when I drove away for the last time. But instead, I feel like I've finally closed a chapter that needed ending. Marianne returned with 2 steaming bowls of her famous chowder and a basket of warm sourdough. As we ate, I found myself noticing details of the cafe I'd never fully appreciated before. The collection of vintage fishing floats displayed along one wall, the subtle nautical motifs woven into the upholstery, the way the afternoon light played across the weathered floorboards. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking off a piece of sourdough. "The skills I developed restoring Silvercrest, they don't disappear just because I no longer own the house. The vision, the attention to detail, the ability to see potential beneath neglect, those remain mine." Mason nodded encouragingly. "You were a talented designer and preservationist before Andrew, during your marriage, and you still are now. That was never about him." "Exactly. And I've been so focused on what I've lost, or rather, what I chose to relinquish, that I haven't fully considered what possibilities might lie ahead." My phone chimed with an incoming text. I hesitated before checking it, half expecting an angry message from Andrew or even Vanessa. Instead, it was from Sophia. "Just heard from Elizabeth. She's thrilled with the sale and looks forward to taking possession on Monday. How did the confrontation go?" I sent a brief reply. "Exactly as expected. They were shocked. Andrew threatened legal action, but his attorney confirmed the sale is valid. We left them to begin packing. We'll call with details later." Almost immediately, another message appeared. This one from Jessica. "Vanessa just canceled our consultation for Wednesday. Called in tears saying they have to vacate the house. Guessing your plan worked perfectly. Details when you're ready." I showed both messages to Mason, who grinned. "The network of women who made this happen is impressive. Andrew never stood a chance." The observation struck me as profound. Throughout this entire process, I had relied not on confronting Andrew directly with emotional appeals, a battle I would likely have lost, given his skill at manipulation, but on building a strategic alliance of professional women who recognized the legitimacy of my position. Sophia with her legal expertise, Jessica with her architectural knowledge, Elizabeth with her appreciation for historical preservation, even Marianne who had fed and encouraged me through the original renovation. He never saw it coming because he never really saw me, I realized aloud. All those years of marriage, and Andrew never understood that beneath my accommodating exterior was someone capable of methodical, strategic action. "His mistake," Mason said, raising his water glass, in a mock toast. "And your victory." After lunch, we took a final walk along the Silvercrest town beach. It was busier now, dotted with weekend visitors spreading blankets and unfurling umbrellas against the midday sun. I removed my sandals, letting my feet sink into the warm sand as we strolled along the water's edge. "You know what's strange?" I said, pausing to pick up a perfect scallop shell, its ridges smooth beneath my fingertips. When I first discovered Andrew had moved Vanessa into the beach house, I was devastated. It felt like the ultimate violation, not just of our marriage, but of the one place that was undeniably mine. Mason nodded, waiting for me to continue. But now, I'm almost grateful it happened. Without that catalyst, I might have remained in this limbo state indefinitely, technically separated, but not moving forward, holding on to Silvercrest as my last connection to a marriage that had already ended in every way that mattered. Silver. "Bullet theory?" Mason suggested. "Sometimes you need a clean shot to finally end things." I laughed at his typically direct metaphor. "Something like that. Though in this case, I was the one who fired the bullet." As we walked back to the car, I took one last look at Silver Crest in the distance, the cedar siding gleaming in the afternoon sun, the blue-gray shutters I'd so carefully selected to match the winter ocean. The house would have a new chapter now, with Elizabeth Caldwell as its steward. The thought brought unexpected comfort rather than pain. The drive back to the city gave me time to process the morning's events, to sift through my feelings about the confrontation and its aftermath. Andrew's expression when he realized the sale was legal and binding. Vanessa's slow comprehension that their renovation plans were now meaningless. The strange sense of power that had flowed through me as I stood my ground against Andrew's anger and manipulation. By the time we reached my apartment building, I had mentally cataloged and filed away the entire Silver Crest chapter of my life, not forgotten, but properly contextualized as one phase in a continuing journey rather than the defining framework of my existence. "Want me to come up?" Mason asked as he pulled into a parking space. I considered his offer, assessing my emotional state with the same careful attention I'd once applied to evaluating potential renovation materials. "Thanks, but I think I'm okay. I need some time alone to process everything and plan next steps." He studied my face, then nodded, satisfied that I was genuinely all right, rather than putting on a brave front. "Call if you need anything, day or night." Inside my apartment, I kicked off my sandals and changed out of the ivory linen dress that had served its symbolic purpose. In its place, I chose comfortable leggings and an oversized sweater, practical clothes for the practical tasks that lay ahead. First, I called Sophia, filling her in on the details of the confrontation while they were still fresh in my mind. "Textbook execution," she commented when I'd finished, "and legally unassailable. I've already drafted responses to the most likely challenges Andrew might attempt, though based on what you've described, his attorney has probably already advised him against pursuing them." "What happens now?" I asked. "With the divorce proceedings. Now we're in a much stronger position to negotiate a final settlement. With the Silvercrest property removed from the equation and established as having been your separate asset, Andrew has significantly less leverage. We should be able to finalize terms within a month, 2 at most." After ending the call with Sophia, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. On impulse, I created a new folder titled Future Projects, then began researching properties in the city's historic district. Not to purchase immediately, the proceeds from Silvercrest would need time to settle, and I wanted to be deliberate about my next move, but to begin envisioning possibilities. A text notification interrupted my browsing. An unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, preparing myself for an angry message from either Andrew or Vanessa. Instead, it was from Elizabeth Caldwell. "Sophia shared your number. I wanted to thank you personally for trusting me with Silvercrest. The property manager just sent preliminary photos. It's even more beautiful than I remembered. I promise to honor its history and your vision in my stewardship." Attached was a photo taken from the beach looking up at the house, the vantage point from which I'd first fallen in love with the property 3 years earlier. The cedar siding glowed golden in the late afternoon light, the blue-gray shutters providing perfect contrast, the wraparound porch offering its embracing welcome to the coastline beyond. I felt a momentary pang, not of regret, but of recognition. The house looked exactly as I'd intended when I'd undertaken its restoration. Despite Andrew and Vanessa's interior modifications, the essential character I'd worked so hard to preserve remained intact, now passed into hands that would appreciate and maintain it. I saved Elizabeth's number and replied, "Thank you for this. Knowing Silvercrest will be appreciated for what makes it special means more than you know." The house has stories to tell if you listen carefully enough. The mason's initials in the cornerstone of the fireplace. The ship's timber was repurposed as the main support beam in the kitchen. The compass rose I painted on the primary bedroom ceiling, though that may be gone now. Her response came quickly. "The compass rose is painted over, but I plan to restore it. Found your original design notes in the article about the renovation. As for the ship's timber and mason's mark, I look forward to discovering these details myself. This is exactly the kind of historical connection I was hoping for. I smiled, setting down my phone with a sense of completion. Silver Crest would be all right. Different, certainly, but its essential character is preserved rather than erased. Doorbell rang, startling me from these reflections. The moving company wasn't scheduled to deliver my items from Silvercrest until tomorrow morning. For a momentary, irrational second, I wondered if Andrew had somehow tracked me down. But I dismissed the thought immediately. He had no reason to confront me here when he was undoubtedly busy dealing with the logistics of vacating the beach house within the 48-hour deadline. Through the peephole, I saw Jessica standing in the hallway, a bottle of champagne in one hand, and what appeared to be a folder of papers in the other. "Surprise strategy meeting," she announced when I opened the door. "Or victory celebration, or both." I brought bubbly and brownstone listings. I laughed, genuinely delighted by her unexpected appearance. "How did you know I was already looking?" "At real estate?" "Because I know you," she replied, setting the champagne on my kitchen counter and spreading out property listings across the dining table. "And the Olivia Parker I know doesn't stay down for long. She dusts herself off and starts planning the next project." Jessica popped the champagne while I found glasses, and we settled at the table to review the properties she'd brought, a carefully curated selection of historic homes in the city's oldest neighborhoods. "This one has potential," she said, pointing to a federal-style brownstone with elaborate moldings and original hardwood floors. "Needs work, but the architectural details are intact beneath some questionable 1970s updates." I studied the listing, noting the south-facing windows that would capture natural light throughout the day, the proportions of the main rooms that suggested a thoughtful original design, the hints of craftsmanship visible even in the limited photos. "It reminds me a bit of my grandparents' house," I mused. "Those same tall windows, the center hallway layout." The connection to my grandmother Catherine, whose inheritance had made Silver Crest possible, felt significant. A continuation of legacy through a different property but a similar appreciation for historical character. As we reviewed more listings, a pattern emerged in what caught my attention. Not properties that were already perfectly renovated, but those with good bones and distinctive character hidden beneath years of misguided updates or neglect. Projects that would require vision, patience, and attention to detail. Exactly the qualities I'd applied to Silver Crest, and exactly the qualities Andrew had consistently undervalued in me. "You're drawn to the challenging ones," Jessica observed, refilling our champagne glasses. "The properties no one else can see the potential in." "I suppose I am," I agreed. "There's something deeply satisfying about revealing what's been there all along, just waiting for someone who cares enough to uncover it. Like discovering yourself after Andrew," she suggested gently. The observation startled me with its accuracy. Yes, exactly like that. Beneath all those layers of being Mrs. Andrew Mitchell, the accommodating wife who deferred to his expertise, was this person who always saw more clearly than he did, who understood value that couldn't be quantified. "On a spreadsheet," Jessica raised her glass. "To the real Olivia Parker. May she never be painted over again." We clinked glasses. The crystal sounded bright in my quiet apartment. As we returned to reviewing properties, my phone rang, Andrew's familiar ringtone cutting through our conversation. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to answer that?" I considered the question, weighing the potential value of the conversation against the emotional cost. "Yes, but on speaker. I want a witness." I answered with a simple, "Hello, Andrew," keeping my tone neutral. "We need to talk about this." His voice carried the strain of controlled anger, the familiar tone he used when a business negotiation wasn't going his way. "What you did today, it was unnecessary and spiteful." "What exactly was unnecessary?" I asked calmly. reclaiming control of my separate property after you moved into it without permission, or ensuring it went to someone who would value what makes it special rather than erasing it? This isn't about the house, Liv, and you know it. This is about punishing me for ending our marriage, for finding happiness with Vanessa. I exchanged glances with Jessica, who rolled her eyes dramatically at Andrew's transparent attempt to reframe the narrative. No, Andrew, this is precisely about the house. You assumed you could claim my separate property as your own, move your girlfriend into it without permission, and remake it according to her taste rather than respecting the work I put into it. Those actions had consequences. Simple cause and effect. We're having to find a hotel on zero notice, he complained. The 48-hour timeline is completely unreasonable. The timeline is generous, legally speaking, I replied, repeating Sophia's earlier point. And you've had the financial means to secure alternative housing all along. You chose to live in my beach house instead because it was convenient and free. A weighted silence followed, broken only by the sound of his frustrated exhale. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to the conciliatory approach he often employed when direct confrontation failed. Look, Liv, I know things have been difficult between us, but we had 12 years together. Doesn't that count for anything? Couldn't we have worked out some arrangement about Silvercrest that didn't involve such a drastic measure? I considered his question honestly, examining my motivations and the alternatives that had been available. There was a time when compromise might have been possible, Andrew. That time passed when you moved Vanessa into my house without asking, began erasing my work, and then tried to claim the property as part of the divorce settlement despite knowing it was separate under our prenup. And there's no going back? His voice had softened further, employing the tone that had so often swayed me in the past. No way to undo this. The sale is final, I confirmed. And frankly, I'm glad it is. Silvercrest deserves an owner who values what makes it special. Another silence stretched between us, this one filled with the weight of realization. When Andrew finally spoke again, his voice had lost its manipulative undertone, replaced by something that sounded almost like genuine reflection. I underestimated you, Liv. I never thought you'd take such definitive action. I know, I replied simply. That was your mistake. After ending the call, I looked up to find Jessica watching me with undisguised admiration. That, she said, was masterful. The calm, the clarity, the complete refusal to be manipulated. Who are you and what have you done with Olivia, who used to second-guess herself when Andrew raised an eyebrow? I laughed, feeling a strange mixture of liberation and recognition. I think she's been here all along. She just needed the right catalyst to emerge fully. As evening settled over the city, Jessica and I continued reviewing properties, our conversation shifting from the dramatic events of the day to the possibilities that lay ahead. By the time she left, promising to arrange viewings of our top 3 choices, I had begun to envision a new project, not just a replacement for Silvercrest, but a different kind of restoration altogether. One centered in the urban landscape I'd always loved but had compromised on for Andrew's preference, for coastal prestige. Alone again, I moved to the window overlooking the city skyline, now illuminated against the darkening sky. The view was nothing like Silvercrest's panoramic ocean vista, but it held its own beauty, the geometric precision of architecture against nature's soft darkness, the rhythm of traffic flows below, the sense of human ingenuity and aspiration, made visible in steel and glass and stone. My phone chimed one last time for the day, a text from Mason checking in. How are you holding up? I considered the question, taking stock of my emotional state with honest self-assessment. Better than expected, I replied. Actually looking at new properties already. Jessica brought listings. That sounds like the sister I know, came his immediate response. Never down for long. His simple expression of faith in my resilience brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. Mason had always seen me clearly. even when I had lost sight of myself beneath the layers of compromise that had gradually accumulated during my marriage. "Thank you," I texted back, "for everything, for being there today, for sending that first text that opened my eyes." "That's what brothers are for," he replied. "Some of us, anyway." I smiled, setting down my phone and returning my gaze to the city spread out before me. Tomorrow would bring the delivery of my remaining possessions from Silver Crest, the physical remnants of that chapter of my life carefully packed and transported to this new beginning. The day after, I would view potential properties with Jessica, beginning the process of finding not just a new home, but a new project worthy of my skills and vision. The beach house was gone, but what it had represented, my independence, my creative ability, my financial acumen, remained intact. More than intact, strengthened and clarified by the very challenge that might have diminished them had I responded differently. Andrew had moved his mistress into my beach house without permission. In response, I had sold it without telling him. The symmetry of the outcome brought a sense of justice that transcended mere revenge, a restoration of balance that felt right in some fundamental way. The late October afternoon cast golden light through the tall windows of my newly renovated brownstone. I stood in the center of what had once been two separate parlors, now opened into a single flowing space that preserved the original architectural details while accommodating contemporary living. The crown moldings had been meticulously restored, the heart pine floors carefully refinished to reveal their warm honey tones, and the marble fireplace surround gently cleaned to remove decades of soot without erasing the subtle patina of age. "It's exactly as I envisioned it," I told Jessica, who was making notes on her tablet as we conducted our final walkthrough before the photographer arrived. "Better, actually." She nodded in satisfaction, surveying the space with professional pride. "The proportions in these federal-style brownstones are perfect. We just had to strip away the unfortunate additions and let the original design breathe again." We moved through the remaining rooms, noting the few punch list items still to be addressed before the renovation could be considered truly complete. The kitchen with its restored tin ceiling and carefully sourced period-appropriate fixtures. The library where built-in bookshelves now lined the walls, crafted to match fragments of the original millwork we'd discovered during demolition. The primary bedroom suite where I'd reimagined the layout to incorporate modern conveniences while honoring the historical footprint. This project had been different from Silver Crest in almost every way: urban rather than coastal, compact rather than expansive, restoration rather than renovation, yet it had drawn on the same core skills: the ability to see potential beneath neglect, the patience to research historical details, the vision to harmonize past and present in a cohesive whole. "Architectural Digest is going to love this," Jessica remarked as we descended the restored staircase with its graceful mahogany handrail. The contrast between the before and after photos is stunning, but what makes it special is how faithfully you've honored the original character while creating a thoroughly modern living space. I smiled, remembering the property listing we'd viewed just days after the Silvercrest confrontation. The brownstone had been on the market for months, lingering unsold despite its prime location, because most buyers couldn't see past the chopped-up rooms, dropped ceilings, and outdated systems. Where others saw obstacles, I had seen opportunity. The eye, chance to reveal and restore the elegance that had been obscured, but never entirely lost. "Have you heard anything from Elizabeth recently?" Jessica asked as we settled in the kitchen where the contractor had left a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket, a traditional gesture to mark the completion of a successful project. "She sent photos last week," I replied, reaching for my phone to show her. "She's been working with a historical preservation consultant to restore some of the original features that had been modified." The images showed Silver Crest looking much as it had when I'd owned it, but with subtle enhancements that respected its character while improving functionality. The compass rose I'd painted on the primary bedroom ceiling had been meticulously recreated. The vintage blue willow china was once again displayed on the open shelving in the kitchen. The window seat had been reinstalled and improved with additional storage. "She's honored your vision," Jessica observed, scrolling through the photos, "while still making it her own. That's the mark of a thoughtful steward." I nodded, feeling a sense of peaceful closure rather than the pang of loss I might once have expected. That's exactly what Silvercrest needed. Someone who would preserve what mattered while allowing it to evolve. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the photographer who would document the brownstone renovation for the magazine feature. As Jessica went to greet him, I took a final moment alone in the kitchen, running my hand along the edge of the soapstone counter I'd sourced from a historical salvage yard in Philadelphia, a material chosen not just for its aesthetic appeal, but for its connection to the building's era and original function. This brownstone represented something different from Silvercrest, not a retreat from a failing marriage or an assertion of independence, but a deliberate choice made from a position of strength and clarity. Every decision in its restoration had been mine alone, informed by research and guided by a vision that balanced preservation with practicality. The photographer's voice drifted from the entryway as Jessica gave him a preliminary tour. I straightened my shoulders and prepared to join them, ready to share insights about the challenging process that had transformed a neglected historical property into a showpiece of urban restoration. Later that evening, after the photo shoot had wrapped and Jessica had departed with the photographer to discuss potential angles for the magazine feature, I found myself alone in my new home for the first time since the renovation had been completed. The contractor's tools were gone, the protective coverings removed, the spaces cleaned and staged to highlight the architectural details we'd worked so hard to preserve and enhance. I moved from room to room, turning on lamps as twilight settled, over the city, watching how the carefully selected lighting brought depth and warmth to the historical features. In the library, I lit a fire in the restored fireplace, testing the draw of the chimney we'd painstakingly rebuilt brick by brick. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows across the bookshelves where I'd already begun arranging my collection. Design references and historical preservation guides interspersed with novels and biographies. My phone chimed with an incoming email, a follow-up from Sophia regarding the final divorce settlement that had been signed last week. Andrew had ultimately accepted terms that reflected the separate nature of our major assets, with minimal drama. Once he realized his legal position was untenable. The process had been remarkably civilized, conducted primarily through attorneys with only one brief in-person meeting required to address specific details. That meeting had been surprising, in ways I hadn't anticipated. Andrew had arrived alone, without the bluster or manipulation tactics I'd come to expect. Instead, he had been subdued, almost reflective. "You were right," he'd said at one point, when our attorneys had stepped out to confer about a particular clause. About the beach house, about a lot of things. I'd studied him across the conference table, noting the subtle signs of strain around his eyes, the slight slump in the shoulders that had always been held so confidently. "It wasn't about being right," I'd replied after considering his words. "It was about being respected, about having my separate property and separate identity acknowledged rather than appropriated." He nodded slowly. "I never saw it that way. I always thought of everything as ours. My career, your inheritance, our properties. But ours always seemed to default to my preferences, didn't it?" The acknowledgement had been unexpected, a rare moment of genuine self-reflection from a man who had typically externalized blame and reframed narratives to position himself as the reasonable party. "Yes," I'd confirmed simply. "It did. We hadn't achieved some dramatic reconciliation or profound closure in that meeting. There had been no tearful apologies or promises of friendship. But there had been a brief, honest exchange between two people who had once shared a life and were now moving definitively in separate directions. A moment of mutual recognition that felt more valuable than any emotional scene could have been. closed Sophia's email, making a mental note to review the final paperwork in the morning, and continued my solitary tour of the brownstone. In the primary bedroom, I opened the French doors leading to the small private terrace we'd created by reclaiming an unused section of roof. The October evening was crisp, but not cold, the city lights beginning to sparkle against the darkening sky. From this vantage point, I could see the varied roof lines of neighboring buildings, some contemporaries of my federal-style brownstone, others representing later architectural periods, all coexisting in the layered urban landscape that told the story of the city's evolution over 2 centuries. How different from Silvercrest's panoramic ocean views, I thought. Yet there was beauty here too, a different kind of beauty, one that spoke of human creativity and resilience, of structures built and rebuilt, adapted and preserved through generations of change. My phone rang, interrupting these reflections. "It was Mason. Just checking in before my flight tomorrow," he said when I answered. "How did the photo shoot go?" "Perfectly," I replied, settling into one of the terrace chairs. The photographer was impressed, said the restoration work was museum quality, but still felt like a real home. That's high praise. I could hear the smile in his voice. "So the big question, are you staying there or flipping it like you initially planned?" It was a fair question. When I'd purchased the brownstone, I'd been uncertain whether it would become my permanent home or a restoration, project to be sold once completed. The proceeds from Silvercrest had made either option financially viable. "I'm staying," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke it aloud. This place feels right in a way I didn't expect, not just as a project I'm proud of, but as a home that fits who I am now. The urban preservationist rather than the coastal renovator? Something like that. Though I've already got my eye on a small commercial building in the historic district that's been neglected for decades. The original facade is intact beneath the 1960s additions, and the interior still has the original tin ceilings. Mason laughed. "Of course you do. You wouldn't be Olivia Parker if you weren't already planning the next restoration project." After we'd ended the call, I remained on the terrace, watching the city settle into evening rhythms. Traffic flows ebbed as commuters reached their destinations. Lights appeared in neighboring windows as residents returned home. The distant hum of urban life created a background soundtrack so different from Silvercrest's crashing waves, yet oddly comforting in its human energy. I thought about the path that had led me here, from the shocked awakening via Mason's late-night text 4 months ago to this moment of quiet satisfaction in my newly restored brownstone. The journey hadn't been what I'd expected when Andrew first suggested taking space in our marriage, but it had led me precisely where I needed to be. The sound of the doorbell startled me from these reflections. I wasn't expecting anyone, and few people had my new address. Curious, I made my way downstairs, switching on lights as I went. Through the leaded glass panels flanking the front door, I could see a woman's silhouette, unfamiliar in its proportions, definitely not Jessica, returning for something forgotten. For a bizarre moment, I wondered if it might be Vanessa, though I couldn't imagine what would bring her to my doorstep. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Elizabeth Caldwell. "Elizabeth," I said, surprised but not displeased. "This is unexpected." She smiled, looking slightly apologetic for the unannounced visit. "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm in the city for a conference and remembered you mentioned your brownstone was in this neighborhood. When I walked past and saw the lights on, I took a chance." "Not intruding at all," I assured her, stepping back to invite her in. "I was just having a quiet evening appreciating the completed renovation. Would you like a tour?" "I'd love one," she replied, following me into the entryway. "Oh, this is magnificent," she added, taking in the restored millwork and period details. "The proportions are perfect." For the next hour, I showed Elizabeth through the brownstone, explaining the challenges we'd encountered and the solutions we'd developed to address them while honoring the building's historical character. Her questions were thoughtful, her observations insightful. the same appreciation for craftsmanship and architectural integrity that had made her the perfect buyer for Silver Crest. "Your attention to detail is extraordinary," she commented as we settled in the library where the fire still burned cheerfully in the restored fireplace. "The way you've preserved these historical elements while making the space thoroughly livable, it's exactly what I've been trying to do at Silver Crest." "Speaking of which," I said, "how are you finding coastal living? Quite a change from San Francisco, I imagine." She smiled, accepting the glass of wine I'd offered. "It's been wonderful, actually. The rhythm of the tides, the changing light throughout the day. There's something deeply centering about living so connected to natural cycles." "I always thought so," I agreed, remembering mornings spent on the wraparound porch, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. "The house has good energy. It was built to embrace its setting rather than impose upon it. That's what I love most about it. And the history you uncovered during the renovation. The mason's mark in the fireplace, the ship's timber in the kitchen. These connections to the past make it feel like I'm part of something larger than myself, a continuum of caretakers rather than just an owner." Her words resonated deeply with my own philosophy of historical preservation. That's exactly how I've always viewed restoration work. We're temporary stewards, not permanent possessors. Our job is to preserve what matters while allowing thoughtful evolution. As our conversation continued, ranging from specific architectural techniques to broader philosophies of preservation and adaptation, I realized something unexpected was happening. Elizabeth and I were developing a genuine friendship based on shared values and complementary expertise, a connection that transcended the transactional relationship of seller and buyer. When she eventually prepared to leave, promising to send updated photos of the continued restoration work at Silver Crest, I found myself suggesting a collaboration. The commercial building I mentioned, the one with the original tin ceilings. It has potential as a small architectural preservation consultancy. If you're ever looking to expand your tech company's East Coast presence, it might be an interesting partnership opportunity. Elizabeth's eyes lit up with interest. "That's exactly the kind of project I've been considering for my foundation work, creating spaces that demonstrate how historical preservation and contemporary needs can coexist beautifully. I'd love to hear more when your plans develop further." After she'd gone, I returned to the terrace, watching the city lights now fully illuminated against the night sky. The unexpected visit had crystallized something I'd been feeling throughout. The brownstone renovation, but hadn't fully articulated, even to myself. Silver Crest had represented one chapter in my journey, an important one that had revealed strengths I hadn't fully recognized and catalyzed growth I might otherwise have deferred indefinitely. But that chapter had closed not with loss, but with transformation, creating space for new possibilities I couldn't have envisioned while fighting to reclaim what had been taken. By selling the beach house to Elizabeth rather than battling Andrew to keep it, I had not only asserted my legal rights, but also ensured its preservation in ways that mattered. And in doing so, I had freed myself to discover new aspects of my passion for restoration. Urban rather than coastal, communal rather than solitary, forward-looking rather than retrospective. Andrew had moved his mistress into my beach house, without permission, assuming I would either acquiesce or engage in a protracted emotional battle he was confident of winning. Instead, I had sold the property without telling him, creating a resolution that was legally unassailable and emotionally liberating. But the true victory wasn't in outsmarting Andrew or even in securing the financial value of my separate property. The true victory was in discovering that I was capable of decisive, strategic action in my own interest. That the skills I had developed restoring neglected properties, vision, patience, attention to detail, respect for historical integrity, could be applied equally well to restoring my own sense of self after years of gradual compromise. As I prepared for bed that night in my newly completed brownstone, I thought about the parallel journeys of the two properties that had defined this transitional period in my life. Silver Crest, passing from my stewardship to Elizabeth's, continuing its evolution as a coastal haven with its essential character preserved. And this federal-style brownstone, transformed from neglected historical footnote to vibrant contemporary, home through careful attention to what made it uniquely valuable. In both cases, the process had been one of revelation rather than reinvention, uncovering and honoring what had been there all along beneath layers of neglect or misguided modification. Just as I had revealed the brownstone's original architectural features by removing inappropriate additions, I had revealed my own authentic self by stripping away the accommodating persona I'd adopted during my marriage to Andrew, the woman who, now moved confidently through this meticulously restored historic home, was not a new creation, but rather the fullest expression of who I had always been. A person of vision and determination, of careful planning and bold action when necessary, of deep respect for history combined with clear-eyed pragmatism about the present. Andrew had never truly seen that woman, even during 12 years of marriage. But I saw her now, reflected in every thoughtful detail of the home I had created for myself. Not as someone's wife or someone's opponent, but simply as Olivia Parker, preservationist and creator, standing firmly in her own carefully restored power. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.